$18 a quarter. That is what it cost a woman in this county to not have a daughter. And she paid it on time for 14 years without ever missing a single one. I found 39 of those bank drafts in the bottom of a sewing basket on a Tuesday in August of 1935, tied together with a bootlace, soft at the folds from being handled, and the name signed across the front of every one of them belonged to a woman who lived 22 miles up the Larkin Road in a white house with a porch that went all the way around. 8 weeks later, I stood up in the middle of her church in front of 200 people who had come to watch her give them a stained glass window, and I said her price out loud. But it didn't begin there. It began on a stage in the Oddfellows Hall in Ashgrove, Nebraska, in the spring of 1921, when I was 6 years old and had a cardboard tag pinned to my coat with a number on it.
Before we go on, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. It always amazes me how far these stories travel, and I like knowing whose kitchen or whose long drive I'm keeping company. Now settle in. This one takes a while to tell, and it should. The number was 41. They penned it through the wool at my shoulder, and the pen went in crooked so the point of it rode against my collarbone the whole afternoon. And I remember thinking that if I stood very straight, it wouldn't press so hard. There were 11 of us in that hall, and we came off a train that had left Omaha that morning with a woman named Miss Rask in charge of us and a bushel basket of sandwiches wrapped in waxed paper. They walked us up onto the platform where the lodge put on its plays, and the men of Ashgrove came up one at a time and looked at our teeth and our hands. Not roughly. That is what people always want me to say, that it was rough. And it wasn't. It was polite. That is the part I have never been able to explain to anybody who wasn't standing up there. Everett Sudduth came up in a clean shirt with the collar buttoned and his hat in his left hand, and he looked at me longer than he looked at any of the others. And he asked Miss Rask a question I could not hear. She answered him and put her finger down on a line in the book she carried, a long green ledger with a cloth spine, and he nodded once. Then he came and crouched down in front of me so his knees cracked, and he said, "Can you carry a bucket, child?" I said I could carry two. He laughed at that, and it was a good laugh, and I decided in that second that I would go with him anywhere he wanted. That was the whole of it. That was my whole life turning over, and it took less time than boiling an egg. I want to be fair about the 14 years that came after, because a person who is not fair about her own story can't expect anybody to believe the ugly parts. The Sudduths did not beat me. There was food on the table every day of the Depression, which is more than a good many houses in Otoe County could say. Mabel Sudduth taught me to read a recipe and to turn a heel on a sock and to get a stain out of a work shirt with nothing but lye soap and cold water and patience. Everett taught me to back a wagon, to tell a sick hog from a lazy one, and to keep my mouth shut when a man came around asking about somebody else's business. I slept in the back room off the kitchen, the one with the stovepipe running up through the corner, and in January that stovepipe was the warmest thing in Nebraska, and I was glad of it. But I was not their daughter. Their daughter was Opal, 2 years older than me, with Mabel's small chin and Everett's laugh, and Opal had a bed upstairs and a coat bought new, and a name that was written in the front of the family Bible in ink. My name was not in the Bible. It was on a cardboard tag in a tin candy box under the loose board beneath my bed, along with a blue hair ribbon that had come with me on the train, and a dime Everett gave me the first Christmas. And that was every single thing in the world that was mine. By 1935, I was 20 years old, and I did the work of a hired man and half a hired girl, and the mornings all ran together into one morning.
I was up at 4:30 because the cows do not care what year it is or what the corn is bringing. I went out through the kitchen with my shoes in my hand so the porch board by the door wouldn't cry under me. That board had a voice like a cat, and Mabel slept light, and a person who wakes Mabel Suddeth before she is ready to be awake pays for it all day. The yard smelled of dust that summer. Everything smelled of dust.
You could taste it on your teeth by 9 in the morning. A fine grit, like somebody had shaken flour made of dirt over the whole state. And when the wind came up out of the southwest, the sun went the color of a bruised peach, and the chickens went to roost at 2 in the afternoon because they thought night had come. I milked 6 cows in the dark by feel, and by the sound of the milk changing pitch in the pail. Then the separator, then the calves, then the eggs. The eggs were mine in a way nothing else was, because Mabel let me keep the egg money. Not all of it, the odd cents on the dollar, but she let me keep it, and she said it like a gift every time she said it. By August, I had $11.40 rolled in a stocking in the tin box under the loose board. I was saving it toward a room in town, though I had never said that out loud to a living soul, not even to Opal, and especially not to Opal. Breakfast in that house went the same way every day for 14 years. Everett at the head with the Omaha paper folded to the market page, Mabel at the stove with her back to all of us because she liked to eat standing up and said sitting made her feel lazy. Opal across from me. Clay's chair had been empty since March, when he signed on with the Civilian Conservation Corps and went out to a camp in the Sandhills. And nobody had moved that chair or sat in it, and every meal we ate around it. "There's a letter from Clay," Mabel said that morning, and she said it to the skillet. Opal put her fork down. "When did it come?" "Saturday." "Saturday was 3 days ago, Ma." "I know when Saturday was." Mabel turned the eggs over one at a time, and the fat spat, and she didn't flinch. "It's on the shelf by the clock. He's fine. He's put on 11 pounds, and he wants his good boots set out." I had been in that house long enough to know exactly what had happened. The letter had come Saturday, and she had read it Saturday and put it behind the clock, and she would let it sit there until somebody made her produce it, because a letter in Mabel Suddeth's hand was worth something, and a letter given away was worth nothing. She did the same with the Sears catalog and with the news that the Prather girl was getting married and with anything else that anybody in that house might want. It was not cruelty. I want to be exact, because later on I had to be exact in front of people who did not want to believe me. It was not cruelty. It was inventory. "Nell," she said, "you'll take the eggs in Thursday." "Yes, ma'am." "And you'll come back with the change and not stand around the drugstore." "Yes, ma'am." Everett turned a page. "Let her have a soda if she wants a soda. She can have a soda when she's paying for the sugar in it," Mabel said. That was the closest thing to a quarrel that ever happened at that table, and it happened maybe twice a month, and it always ended the same way, with Everett turning another page and letting it go. He was a kind man who had learned that kindness cost less if you spent it quietly. I have thought about that a great deal since, about what a man like that will let happen right in front of him, rather than say a hard sentence out loud at breakfast. Thursday, I drove the eggs into Ashgrove. 12 crates in the back of the truck, packed in straw, 22 cents the dozen that summer, and going down. Ashgrove was one street and a grain elevator and a bank that had closed in 1932 and never opened, with the gold letters still on the glass. Larkin, 22 miles east on the county road, was the real town. 2 banks that were still breathing, a picture show, a hotel, the Chalfant Lumber and Grain Company with its own siding off the main line,
and the telephone exchange over the drugstore where Bertie Lorimer sat all day with a headset on and knew everything that happened in 3 counties before the people it happened to knew it. Bertie was the one friend I had that was mine and not the family's. She was 23. She had a laugh you could hear through a closed door, and she had been trying for 4 months to get me onto the switchboard beside her. "Second girl," she said that Thursday, hanging over the counter at the drugstore with her Coca-Cola sweating in her hand. "Mr. Dietrich's giving up nights. He's got the arthritis in his hands, something awful, and he can't work the cords. $8 a week, Nell. $8, and a room over Ivor's for 2 1/4. $8 a week. I did the arithmetic 3 separate times while she was still talking, the way you do when a number is too good and you keep checking it for a hole. I'd have to ask. "You're 20 years old. Who do you have to ask?" I did not have an answer for that, and Bertie saw that I did not, and she was decent enough to look at her Coca-Cola instead of at me, because that was the thing that neither of us had ever put a name to. I was 20 years old. I was not indentured. There was no paper. Nobody owned me. The placing out people had been very clear about that in 1921, and Miss Rask had said it in the hall with her hand on my head, that I was to be raised as a member of the family and not as a servant, and that the society would come and see about me. Nobody ever came and saw about me. I had been out of that agreement since I was 18, and I could have walked to the county road with my tin box under my arm any day I liked. I just could not do it. I want to be honest about that too. It was not chains. It was that when I thought about saying the words to Mabel, "I have a position in Larkin. I'll be leaving Sunday week," my throat shut like a fist, and I would put it off one more Thursday and one more. I asked that night. I picked my time after supper, when Everett had gone out to look at a sow that was off her feed, and it was just Mabel and me and the dishpan. I dried a plate I had already dried, and I said it in one breath. That there was a place going on the switchboard, second girl, $8, that I could come home Sundays and give her the difference, that I'd stay through the corn. Mabel did not stop washing. She ran the cloth around the inside of a cup twice, 3 times, 4, and the water dripped. And out in the yard, the windmill turned over once with that long groan it had. "No," she said. "Ma'am, it's $8. I heard the figure." She set the cup in the rack. "Who put that in your head? The Lorimer girl? Bertie told me the place was open. That's all she did. Larkin." She said the name of the town the way you'd say the name of a disease. "You've no business in Larkin. Sitting up over a drugstore listening in on other people's troubles all night, and every drummer and railroad man in the county knowing where a girl on her own sleeps. No, there's the corn coming and the canning, and I've got my back. You'll not hear another word about it." And here is the part I turned over for years afterward and could never once make come out even. Her hands were shaking. Not much, but the cup rang against the rack when she set it down, and Mabel Suddeth had hands like a set of tongs, and had never in 14 years dropped a thing or rattled a thing. She was afraid. I stood there with the towel in my hand, and I thought, she is afraid I'll go. And I was fool enough to feel warm about it, because in 14 years, that was the closest thing to love that woman had ever handed me. And I took it. She was not afraid I would go. She was afraid of where I was going, and of who lived there, and of what would happen to $18 a quarter if I ever stood in the wrong street at the wrong hour of the day. But I did not know that for another 3 weeks, and I went to bed that night almost happy, and I lay there listening to the stovepipe tick, and I made a plan to ask again after the corn was in.
That was the 21st of August. The letter that undid everything was already in the house. It had been there since Saturday behind the clock, and it was not from Clay. I went for Clay's letter the next evening because Opal asked me to, and because Opal was going to keep asking until somebody did. The clock stood on the shelf over the sideboard, a mantel clock with a walnut case that had been Mabel's mother's, and behind it was where that house kept the things it had not decided about yet. Seed receipts, the funeral home calendar, a pressed sprig of something from a wedding in 1911. I reached in behind it and my fingers found 2 envelopes instead of 1. Clay's was on top, the cheap buff kind the camp canteen sold, addressed in his round, careless hand with the C going off at a slant. The one underneath was different, and I knew it was different before I had it all the way out into the lamplight, the way you know a stranger's step on the porch. It was good paper, heavy, with a linen weave you could feel with your thumb, and the address was in a woman's hand, small and slanted and taut. Mrs. Everett Suddeth, Route 2, Ashgrove, Nebraska. And in the corner printed, not written, Chalfant Lumber and Grain Company, Larkin, Nebraska. The flap had been slit clean with a knife instead of torn, which was not how anybody in our house opened anything. Now, I have never in my life come so close to dropping something. Mabel was in the kitchen doorway with the dish towel over her shoulder, and I had not heard the floor give at all, and I have wondered since whether she had been standing there the whole time waiting to see which envelope I would take. Opal wanted Clay's letter, I said. Then take Clay's letter. She came across the room, not fast, and put her hand out flat, palm up, the way you do to a child holding something breakable. I put the Chalfant envelope into it. She did not look at it. She folded it once and put it into her apron pocket and said, Lumber bill. Everett's got a mind to shingle the corn crib, and he'll want the money for it come spring, and he'll not get it. Then she took the dish towel off her shoulder and wiped the shelf where the envelopes had been, though there was no dust on it, because I had wiped that shelf myself on Monday. 2 things about that. The first is that the Chalfant Company was in Larkin, 22 miles off, and we bought our lumber and our coal from Denbo's in Ashgrove, 3 miles, and had for as long as I could remember, because Everett and old Denbo had been in the same regiment. The second is that a lumber bill does not come on linen paper in a woman's handwriting. I carried Clay's letter upstairs to Opal, and she read it out loud to me sitting on her bed with her feet tucked under her. And he had put on 11 pounds, and he wanted his good boots, and there was a fellow in his crew from Valentine who could play anything on a mouth organ. I laughed in the right places. The whole time there was something going on in my chest like a moth in a jar, and I could not have told you why. And if you had asked me that night what I was afraid of, I would have said nothing at all. That was the 22nd of August. I have had cause to fix the dates since, and I have them all. Once you start seeing a thing, you cannot stop seeing it. That is the part nobody warns you about. For 14 years I had lived in that house, and everything in it had been ordinary as bread. And then, in the space of 1 week, the ordinary things stood up on their hind legs and looked at me. 4 times a year, Mabel went to Larkin. She went the first week of March, June, September, and December. She went alone, and she went in her good coat with her hat pinned on, and she was gone from breakfast until 3 in the afternoon. She called it going to the bank. It had never once struck me as strange because it had been happening since before I could reach the pump handle, and a thing that has always happened does not look like anything at all. But we banked in Ashgrove, at the Farmers and Merchants, in the little office they kept open in the back of the hardware after the crash, and Everett did the banking. He did it every Saturday, with the deposit book in his shirt pocket,
I sat on the milking stool one morning with my forehead against a cow's flank, and I counted it out. 4 times a year. 14 years. 56 trips to a town we had no business in. Then there was the fair.
The Otoe County Fair was the last week of August, and it was the one whole day of the year that everything stopped. And Everett gave us each 50 cents, and we went. I had been going since I was 7, and every single year of those 13 years, there had been a moment I never told anybody about, because it was too small to be a thing, and because when you have been given away once, you learn early not to say out loud that somebody is looking at you. There was a woman who watched me at the fair. Not every year, most years. She was always at a distance, across the poultry barn or up in the grandstand while I was down at the rail, or standing by the ice cream booth with her gloves on in August, which nobody else did. She wore good clothes. She was tall and straight-backed, with a long jaw and hair the color mine had been before it went dark. And she never came any closer than about 30 feet. And if I looked square at her, she would turn and say something to whoever she was with and move off. I had made up stories about her when I was 9, that she was a lady from the society come to see about me, that she was somebody's aunt, that she was nobody and I had imagined her, which was the one I settled on by the time I was 12, because a girl cannot keep on believing a woman is watching her without something coming loose. That August of 1935, she was by the fruit exhibit, and there was a girl with her about 14 years old in a blue dress with a white collar. I stopped in the middle of the aisle, and a man with a cage of bantams ran into the back of me and said something, and I did not hear it. The girl had my face. Not exactly. She was prettier. She had the kind of skin that comes from not being out in a field, and her hair was done. But she had the long jaw and the wide-set eyes and the way of standing with her weight on one hip that I had been told my whole life was slouching. I looked at her the way you look in a still stock tank, and the woman in the gloves saw me see it. I know she did, because her hand went out and took the girl by the elbow and turned her quick, the way you turn a child away from a dog you don't know, and they went down the aisle and out the end door of the exhibit hall and into the crowd. My ears rang. Everything in that barn went far away and tinny. The auctioneer and the poultry and the woman selling lemonade, like somebody had put a wall of straw between me and the world. And I stood there, and my hands were so cold in August that I put them in my armpits like a child. Opal found me. "You've gone the color of a dish rag." "It's the heat." "It's not the heat. You don't take the heat." She looked around the way you do when you missed something. "Did somebody say something to you?" "No." "Nell?" "Nobody said a word to me, Opal. I swear it on the book." And that was true. Nobody had said one word to me. That is exactly what had been done to me for 14 years. And it had been done well. I want to put down here the thing I did next, because it matters later, and because it is not to my credit. That evening I asked Everett. I found him in the machine shed with the seed drill up on blocks, and I handed him wrenches for a while, the way I had since I was 7, and then I said, in a voice I tried to make idle, "Who is it that's tall and gray blonde and wears gloves at the fair?" "Big house people. There was a girl with her, 14 or so." The wrench stopped. It did not clatter. It did not slip. It just stopped and stayed stopped for about the length of time it takes to say a short prayer, and then it went on turning. "Lot of people at the fair," Everett said. "She's been there before." "No." He came out from under the drill and sat back on his heels and wiped his hands on the rag, one finger at a time, and he looked at the rag while he did it. He was 58 years old that summer, and his hair had gone the color of ash,
and there were 2 white patches on his forearms where a man had once let a chain fall on him. "You've had a long day." That's not an answer. It's the answer you're getting. And then, and I have never been able to decide whether he meant it as a kindness or as a lock turning, he said, "There's nothing up that road for you, girl. Whatever's up it. You've got a place here and people that'll see you fed when they're not seeing themselves fed. And there's not one soul in Otoe County can say better than that this year. Let it alone. Whatever's up it." He did not even bother to say he didn't know what I meant. That was when I should have known. Not suspected. Known. And I did not, or I would not, and the difference between those two is a thing I have never got to the bottom of. I went in and washed the supper dishes, and I told myself Everett was a private man, and Mabel was a hard woman and rich people stare. And I put it away, the way I had put away 13 years of a woman in gloves. 3 days later, Mabel burned something in the cook stove in the middle of the afternoon in August. I came in from the garden with my apron full of beans, and she was crouched at the firebox with the lid off and the poker in her hand. And the kitchen was 110 degrees, and there was a smell in it that was not cooking. Paper burning has a particular smell, and heavy paper has another one, sweeter. And when there is ink enough on it, you get a sharpness at the back of the throat. She had the poker down in there pushing at something, and when I came through the door, she put the lid back on so fast it rang. "Beans," she said without turning around. "Set them in the sink." "It's 98 out." "I know what it is out." "You'll have that stove going for supper anyway, ma'am. Whatever wanted burning could have waited 3 hours. She stood up then. I had never once in my life said a sentence like that to her. It was not even sass. It was just arithmetic said out loud, and it stood in the middle of that kitchen with nowhere to go. Mabel Suddeth looked at me for a long moment with the poker still in her hand, and her face went through 2 or 3 things before it settled, and what it settled into was not anger. I have thought about her face for years. It was the look of a woman doing a sum and not liking the answer. "Take your beans out on the porch and string them," she said. "And now, I want you here Thursday. Not town. Here. The eggs, Opal will take the eggs." Opal had never taken the eggs. Not once. Not in 14 years. Because Opal could not back the truck and would not learn. I strung beans on the porch until dark with the pan between my knees and the pods snapping and my mind going around and around like a dog on a chain. Thursday was the 5th of September. The first week of September. And Mabel had her good coat hanging on the back of her door, brushed and aired, 3 days early. I did not sleep that night. I lay in that back room with the stovepipe cold in the corner and the window up for air that didn't come, and along about 2 in the morning, I got up and took the loose board out from under the bed and got the tin candy box and sat on the floor in my nightgown with it open on my knees. The blue ribbon, the dime, $11.40 in a stocking, and the tag, a piece of cardboard the size of 2 postage stamps, gone the color of weak tea, with a hole punched in one corner and a rusted pen still through the hole, and on it, in a clerk's careful hand, the word Ostrander, and under that, the word Nell, and under that, a date, and in the bottom corner, in a different ink, the number 41. I had looked at that tag 10,000 times. I had fallen asleep with it in my fist when I was 7. And that night, sitting on the floorboards at 2 in the morning, I looked at it, and for the first time in my life, a question came up in me that I had never once thought to ask, and it came up cold and clear, the way water comes up in a hole you have been digging in the sand. Somebody wrote this. Somebody sat in a room with a pen and wrote my name on a card. And to write a name down, you have to be given it first. Somebody handed me over the counter and said what to call me. Where is that person now? I did not find out that night.
What I found out that night, when I put the board back and lay down and gave up on sleeping and went out early to start the milking in the dark, was that Mabel's good coat was gone off the back of the door. And it was Wednesday, and she had told me Thursday. Everett drove her in at 7:30. I was at the pump when they went down the lane, and Mabel had her hat on and her pocketbook on her knees, and she did not look at the house. Opal had gone over to the Prathers at 6 to help put up peaches and would not be back before dinner. The dog went partway down the lane after the truck, and then came back and lay down in the shade of the cob shed, and the yard was quiet in that particular way a farmyard gets when everybody who could tell you no is gone. I stood at that pump with my hand on the handle for a long time. I want to be plain about this. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway. And I have never once been sorry. Their room was at the front of the house, and it smelled of camphor and cedar and the particular dryness of a room where the window is only opened in June. I did not touch the bureau. I don't know why not. Some rule I made up on the spot, that drawers were a thief's business and a basket was not. Mabel's sewing basket sat on the floor beside the rocker, where it had sat every day of my life. A round willow thing with a hinged lid and a handle worn smooth and dark. And I had been sent to fetch it 100 times and had carried it into the kitchen and set it at her elbow and never once looked inside it, because there was nothing inside it but sewing. I knelt down on the rag rug and put the lid back. Thread, a tomato pincushion bristling with pins, and one long needle threaded with black. Her thimble, a packet of hooks and eyes, a folded paper of buttons cut off worn-out shirts which every woman in the county kept and nobody ever used. The scissors with the black handles that I was not allowed to touch. I sat back on my heels and something in me let go a little. And I remember being almost disappointed and almost glad. And I very nearly put the lid down and went out and started the wash. Then I lifted the tray out. Underneath, there was a Bull Durham tobacco sack with the yellow drawstring, and under that, a flat bundle of paper about as thick as a deck of cards, tied crossways with a leather bootlace. The lace had been tied and untied so many times that the ends of it were furred out like a cat's tail. My hands went stupid. That is the only way I know to say it. They were still my hands, and they were doing what I told them, but they had gone away from me somehow, and I watched them pick that bundle up and turn it over. And there was a sound in the room that I finally worked out was my own breathing. I sat down flat on the floor with my back against the foot of their bed, in their room, in the middle of a Wednesday morning, and I pulled the end of the lace. They were bank drafts. That was all. I saw the printing and the bank's name in an oval, and I felt the whole thing collapse into nothing. Everett's note, some loan, some business of theirs I had no right to be sitting on the floor with. Farmers and Merchants Bank, Larkin, Nebraska. That was the false floor, and I stood on it for about 4 seconds. Then I read the line. Pay to the order of Mabel Suddeth, 18 and no 100ths dollars. And down in the corner where a man writes what a thing was for, in that same small, taut, slanted hand I had seen on the linen envelope behind the clock, one word. Board. And across the bottom, in ink gone brown with 14 years,
Loretta Chalfant. I went through them one at a time. I made myself. September of 1935 was not among them, because September of 1935 was that morning. That was what the good coat was for. That was what 56 trips to a town we had no business in had been for. June 1935, March 1935, December 1934. They went back and back under my thumb, one for every quarter, and the paper got softer and yellower, and the bank's printing changed style once around 1928, and the hand stayed the same all the way down, and at the very bottom of the stack was one dated the 2nd of April, 1921, and it was for $25 instead of $18, and in the corner it said, "First quarter, and expenses of clothing." 1921. I came off that train the 9th of March, 1921. Something hot and metal came up the back of my throat, and I got as far as the washstand before it took me. And I stood there over that china bowl in their bedroom with the sweat running down inside my dress, holding onto the edge of the stand with both hands. And the room went along at a slow tilt like the deck of a boat. I could hear the windmill. I could hear a hen fussing out under the porch. I remember thinking with a queer, flat clearness that I would have to carry that bowl out to the ditch and rinse it and put it back exactly where it stood. I did that. Then I came back and sat down on the rag rug and picked up the tobacco sack, because a person who has come that far might as well go the rest of the way. Inside it, folded into eighths, was a letter on linen paper. It was dated the 14th of March, 1921, 5 days after the Oddfellows Hall, and it had no greeting at the top, no "Dear Mrs. Suddeth," nothing. The arrangement is as we discussed with Mr. Pruitt, and I will not vary from it. $18 each quarter, paid in Larkin in person, which I trust you will find convenient. She is to be raised plainly and kept usefully occupied. She is not to be told anything whatever, now or at any future time, and if she is told, by you or by your husband or by any person, the payments stop that same day, and you will find you have no friend in this county. She is not to be brought to Larkin. She is not to be schooled past the 8th grade, as there is no call for it and it puts ideas in them. There is to be no photograph made of her. I do not wish to be written to. Mr. Pruitt will hear anything that needs hearing. And under that, the signature, Loretta Chalfant. And then, below the signature, in the same hand but pressed harder, as if it had been added after the pen was already lifted, "She is well placed and I am satisfied." That is the end of it. I sat on that floor a long while. The clock in the front room did the half hour and then the hour, and I could not have got up if the house had caught fire. I was not crying. I want to say that because people always expect the crying to come at the worst part, and it does not. It comes later at some fool thing like a bird on a fence post. What I felt was a kind of terrible tidying up going on inside my head. 14 years of small things standing up and walking over and putting themselves in the right drawer. No school past the 8th grade, and I had been the best reader in that school, and Miss Hetty had come out to the farm herself to say so, and Mabel had met her on the porch and not asked her in. No photograph, and when the Kodak man came around in 1929 and did the family on the porch steps, I had been sent to the spring for water, and I had thought nothing of it. I had thought nothing of it for 6 years. Not to be brought to Larkin. Sitting up over a drugstore. There's nothing up that road for you, girl. And the thing that went in deepest was the smallest one. Kept usefully occupied. Everett brought her home at 3:10. I was in the kitchen with a pan of beans in front of me that I had been shelling for an hour and a half and had not shelled, and the bundle of drafts was on the oilcloth in the middle of the table, squared up with the edge, and the letter was beside it, open. Mabel came in first, untying her hat. She got 2 steps into that kitchen before she saw the table, and she stopped like she had walked into glass. Nobody said anything. Out in the yard, Everett was talking to the dog. The clock did what it did. "You've been in my room," Mabel said. "Yes, ma'am." "In my things." "Yes, ma'am, I have." She put her hat down on the sideboard. Her hands went to her apron strings, and she tied the apron on over her good dress, which she never did, and I understood that she was giving herself something to do with her hands. When she turned around, her face had made itself up into something reasonable. "That's a charity," she said. "There's a woman in Larkin puts money by for orphan children, and it's been a help in hard years. And there's no more to it than that. It's got my board on it." "It's got board on it because that's what it's for, child. Your keep. You've eaten 14 years of my cooking and worn shoes I paid for, $18 a quarter." My own voice came out level and strange and did not sound like anything of mine. $6 a month. Ma'am, I've kept the egg book since I was 13. $6 a month is 108 dozen eggs. I've stood in that hen house and got you 108 dozen eggs a month since I was 14 years old. And that's before the milking and the garden and the wash and the corn. I have paid my own board twice over every month of my life. What did she buy? Don't you take that tone. What did she buy, Mrs. Suddeth? I had called her Ma when I was small and been corrected. And after that, for 14 years, I had called her Ma'am. And I had never in my life said Mrs. Suddeth in that house. It landed like a plate breaking. And Mabel Suddeth's face came apart, not into rage, into something worse. And she sat down in Clay's empty chair, in Clay's chair which nobody sat in, and put her hand flat on the table beside the drafts, and did not touch them. 19 and 20, she said. We lost the North 80, and we lost the mules, and we buried a baby. And there was not one thing in this house to eat that we had not raised or shot. You were not born yet in any way that matters. Don't you look at me like that. Don't you sit in my kitchen at 20 years of age with your belly full and look at me like that. I'm not looking at you anyway. They put $25 in my hand in April of that year. She said it to the oilcloth. $25. It was more money than we had seen since the war. And all I had to do was take in a little girl the county would have thought well of me for taking in anyhow, and feed her, and keep my mouth shut, which the Lord knows I can do. And keep me out of Larkin. And keep you out of Larkin. Why? And there it was, and she went around it. I watched a woman I had lived beside for 14 years walk right up to the edge of the only sentence that mattered and step around it like a hole in a bridge. That's not my business, and it's not yours, she said. I took money for your keep, and I gave you your keep. There's not a soul in this county can say I ever laid a hand on you or sent you hungry. You'll put those back where you found them, and we will hear no more about it, and I will forget you were in my room. No, Nell, no, ma'am. I put my hand down flat on the bundle. These are about me. They've got my name off of them, and they've got my whole life in them, and I'm keeping them. And if you want them, you'll have to send Everett to take them off me by main force in his own kitchen. The screen door opened. Everett had been standing on the porch. I do not know how long. Long enough. Long enough that when he came in, he did not have to ask what was on the table, and he did not look at it. He hung his hat on the nail, and he stood there with his hands hanging,
and he looked at Mabel, and Mabel looked back at him. And something passed between those two people that had been passing between them since before I could walk. "Tell her," he said. "Everett." 14 years, Mabel. The money's done. She's found it, and it's done, and I'll not have her told a lie in this house on top of the rest of it. He pulled out his own chair and sat down heavy, the way he sat down at the end of a day, and he put both hands on the table, and I saw that they were not steady either. "Nell, sit down, girl. There's a thing about that day in the hall you'd best hear from me." "I'm all right standing." "Sit down. Please." He had never said please to me in his life. I sat. "I didn't pick you," Everett Sudduth said. The kitchen was very quiet. "I come into that hall with a paper in my shirt pocket," he said, "wrote out by a lawyer in Larkin, name of Wendell Pruitt, and there was a number on that paper, and it was the number 41. That was the whole of my instructions. I never laid eyes on you before that afternoon. I never asked a thing about you. I walked up that aisle and I counted along the tags till I come to 41, and there you stood. And I asked the Rask woman, was that the one, and she put her finger on the line, and I said we'd take her. I heard myself say, 'You asked me could I carry a bucket.' I did." He rubbed his mouth with the flat of his hand. "You said you could carry 2. And I want you to know that I laughed at that because it was funny and because you were a game little thing, and there wasn't one thing false in it. But no, I never picked you out of that lot now. You was picked before ever the train left Omaha." I got up from that table, and I went out and did the milking. There were 6 cows, and they did not care. And I have been grateful ever since for 6 animals that did not care, because I do not know what I would have done with those 2 hours otherwise. I put my forehead against the warm flank of the old roan, and I milked her out, and my hands did it without me. When I came back across the yard, the kitchen window was yellow, and I could see the 2 of them in there sitting at the table, not talking. And I did not go in. I ate a heel of bread standing up in the milk house in the dark. Opal came out to me at about 10 o'clock. I heard her on the gravel before I saw her, and I knew it was her by the walk, and I did not turn around. She stood in the doorway of the milk house with a lamp in her hand, and the moths already finding it. "Pa told me," she said. "Then you know more than you did this morning." She was quiet a second too long. It was not even a whole second. But I had spent 14 years reading that family the way a man reads weather. Because when you are not really of a house, you learn to read it, or you are always getting caught out in the rain. And I turned around. "Opal, don't. How long have you known?" She set the lamp down on the shelf beside the cream cans, and she did it slowly, and she got it exactly level, and she still had not looked at me. "I was 12, Opal Sudduth said. The cold came up through my feet from that concrete floor and went all the way to the top of my head. 12. She was 2 years older than me. She had been 12 the summer I was 10, the summer we slept out on the porch in the heat and told each other everything. Or I told her everything and thought that was the same transaction. "Say it out." "There was a letter come, and Ma had it in her apron, and she went out to the privy and I got it." Her voice had gone small and flat, a child's recitation. "I read it. I didn't know what half of it meant. I knew it meant you. I took it to her and I said, 'Ma, who's Mrs. Chalfont?' And she—" Opal stopped and put her fingers up against her own cheek without seeming to know she was doing it. "She hit me. Ma never hit me in my life, before or after.
once. And she said if I ever said that name in this house or out of it, we'd lose the place and it would be my doing. I was 12 years old now. I believed her. I believed her for 8 years. 8 years. Yes. I want to be sure I've got it. My voice was doing that level thing again, and I could hear how ugly it was, and I could not stop it. 1927. I was 12 too, near enough. You had a bed upstairs, and I had the back room. And every morning of those 8 years, I got up at 4:30 and did the milking, and you got up at 7. And I would bring the milk in, and you'd be sitting there in your nightgown with your feet up on the rung of the chair. And all that while you knew there was a woman 22 miles off that had a name and a house and paid money on me like a note at the bank. And you sat there with your feet up. Yes. You let me tell you I was going to save $11 and get a room in Larkin. You let me say it out loud on the porch. Yes. And then she did look at me, and her face was wrecked, and I did not care even a little. I've been sick with it since I was 12. There's not been a day. Don't you tell me you've been sick with it. I came off the wall then, and I was closer to hitting her than I have ever been to hitting anybody. And I put my hands behind me. You have been comfortable with it. There's a difference, and it's about the size of this county. Sick would have been you telling me when we were 17. Sick would have been you writing it on a scrap of paper and putting it under my door and never owning to it. You did the arithmetic same as your mother, Opal. You worked out what it would cost you, and it come out too dear, and you went on and had your supper. She did not defend herself. That is the one thing I will say for Opal Suddeth. She stood in that doorway with the moths going at the lamp, and she took it, all of it. And when I ran out of words, she waited to be sure I was done. And then she said, "Her name's Loretta Chalfont. Her husband's Rand Chalfont, the lumber and grain. They've got the elevator at Larkin and one at Talmadge. The house is the white one on Sumner Street with the porch clean around it, 3 blocks up from the Methodist church. There's a girl. She's 14 and her name's Dovey, and she takes piano from a woman that comes out from Nebraska City on the train." She swallowed. "And Ma goes in on the quarter days, and Mr. Pruitt hands her the draft in his office over the Oddfellows, and she never once sets eyes on the woman. I know because I asked her, the one time, when I was 15. And she told me that much to shut me up." I stood there and let all those hard little facts go into me, one after another, like nails going into a board. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because it's out," she said, "and because I'm a coward, and a coward will do a brave thing the second it stopped costing her anything, and I know exactly what that's worth. It's worth nothing. I'm telling you anyhow. I did not forgive her that night. I want to put that down honestly, because there is a version of this story where the sister comes out to the milk house with a lamp, and there is crying, and it is all mended. And that is not what happened. What happened is that I said, 'Get out and let me be.' And she went. And I sat down on an upturned crate in the dark, and stayed there until the lamp oil in the house was out, and every window was black. And somewhere in the middle of those hours, the thing I had been holding off finally came. And it did not come at the drafts or the letter or the 8 years. It came at a memory so small, I had never once taken it out and looked at it. I was 11. It was a Sunday in the fall, and I had been sent down the lane to shut a gate, and there was a motor car stopped on the county road at the end of our lane. A good one, dark blue, with a man in front driving. It was stopped for no reason. There was no gate there, no field entrance, nothing to stop for. I remember I put my hand up to shade my eyes because the sun was behind it,
and a window went down in the back of that car. I remember the glass going down and a gloved hand on the frame, and it stayed down maybe as long as you'd hold a breath, and then it went up again, and the car went on toward Larkin. I had shut the gate and walked back up the lane and forgotten it inside of an hour. I was 11 years old, and a car had stopped, and a window had gone down, and my mother had looked at me for the length of one breath and then rolled the glass back up. That was when I cried. Out in the dark, on a crate in a milk house, 20 years old, over a car window. I cried until my ribs ached and my face was raw with my own sleeve. And when it was over, something had changed in me that never changed back. I did not sleep. Along about 4, I got up and did the milking early, and I was in the kitchen before either of them, and when Mabel came down, I was sitting at the table with my hat on. "I'm taking the eggs in," I said. "I told you, Opal, I'm taking the eggs in to Ashgrove, and then I'm taking the truck on to Larkin. You can tell me not to. You can stand in the door, but you can't tell that woman I never got there because I will be there by 10 o'clock, and after that, it's your lookout what you say to Mr. Pruitt in September." I watched her understand that the arrangement was over. 14 years of it, and it ended in a kitchen at 5:30 in the morning with 2 women looking at each other over a cold stove. She sat down and she said, in a voice with nothing left in it, "There'll be no more money." "No, ma'am. I don't expect there will." "You've cost us." "I know what I've cost you. I've been the one paying it." Larkin, on a Thursday morning in September of 1935. I have been back 100 times since, and I can still walk it in my head the way it was that day, because a person sees a town very clear when she is about to find out what she is in it. The elevator with Chaffont painted up the side in letters 6 feet tall, white on the galvanized, so you could read it from the county road 2 miles out. The lumber yard with the sheds and the smell of new pine and creosote laying over the whole east end of town, and men loading, and a scale house with a window. Chalfont Lumber and Grain. It was on the gate, it was on the trucks, it was on the invoices in every farm kitchen in 3 townships. That name had been in front of my eyes my entire life, and it had meant nothing at all, the way the name of a road means nothing. I drove up Sumner Street once, slow, with 12 empty egg crates rattling in the back of a farm truck, and I did not stop. The house was white, 2 stories with a 3rd-story window in the gable, and the porch went all the way around the way Opal said, and there were ferns hanging in baskets from the porch ceiling, and somebody had watered them that morning because the boards underneath were dark. All the windows were open on account of the heat, and as I came even with the front walk, I heard a piano. It was scales, just scales, up and down, and then a stumble, and then the same run again, slow, the way you do when somebody is sitting beside you making you do it right. Some child practicing in a cool front room at 9 in the morning in the middle of a week in the middle of harvest. 8 years of school. No photograph. Kept usefully occupied. I got to the end of Sumner Street, and I sat at the corner with the motor running and my hands on that wheel until a man in a Ford behind me tapped his horn, and I want you to know that what was in me then was not grief anymore. Grief had gone out of me in the milk house with the moths. What I had that morning was a thing I had never had before in my life. A cold, steady, patient article that sat in my chest and did not shake, and I have carried it ever since, and it has never entirely gone away. And there are days I have been glad of it. I drove down to the drugstore and went up the outside stairs to the telephone exchange, and Bertie Lorimer took one look at my face and put down her headset
and told the day girl she'd be 5 minutes. We sat on the top step in the sun. I told her the whole of it. It took a while. Birdie did not say, "Oh, honey," and she did not say, "Are you certain?" which is why I had come to her instead of anybody else on this earth.
She sat with her elbows on her knees and looked out over the roof of the drugstore at the elevator with the name on it. And when I was done, she was quiet a minute, and then she said, "Wendell Pruitt does not have a wife, a partner, or a stenographer. He's got 2 rooms over the Oddfellows with his name on the glass, and his office hours are 9 to 4, and on Thursdays, he takes his dinner at the hotel at 12:30, and he is gone the better part of an hour. Birdie, I'm only telling you the town." She stood up and brushed off the back of her skirt. "It's 20 minutes past 9, Nell." The stairs to Wendell Pruitt's office went up on the outside of the Oddfellows building, and there was a landing halfway with a window that had not been washed since the Coolidge administration. And I stopped on that landing and put the bundle of drafts inside my dress against my ribs where I could feel them. Then I went up and turned the knob without knocking, because I had worked out on the stairs that a girl who knocks can be told to come back Tuesday. He was at a roll-top desk with his back to the door and a fan going on the filing cabinet. And there was that smell that a lawyer's room has, old paper and pipe ash and the glue and book bindings. He turned around with his reading glasses down his nose. Wendell Pruitt was maybe 60. Soft hands, good gray suit for a hot morning, a little dry mouth of a man with a big square head. He looked at me for perhaps 3 seconds, and I watched him arrive all the way and go pale around the nose. "Well," he said, "you know who I am." "I believe I do." He took the glasses off and folded them and laid them on the blotter, and he did not stand up. And that was the first true thing he told me. "Ostrander, Nell Ostrander, you wrote the number 41 on a paper and gave it to a man named Everett Suddeth in March of 1921 and told him which child to take off a train. Sit down, Miss Ostrander. I'll stand. Then I'll stand, for I was not raised in a barn." He got up, and he did it slowly, and he went and shut the hall door that I had left open, and that little bit of business bought him the time he needed to put his face back on. When he turned around, he was smooth as a river stone. "You have come into some information." I put the bundle on his desk. I did not untie it. He looked at the bootlace, and something went across his face that I have thought about since. And I am nearly certain it was disgust. And I am nearly certain it was not for me. "I want 3 things," I said. "I want her name from your own mouth. I want to know what she signed. And I want to know why Ashgrove." "You are asking me to violate a confidence." "You've been violating one every quarter day for 14 years. You've just been doing it in my direction instead of hers." He sat back down. He put his fingertips together. And then Wendell Pruitt did the thing that nearly finished me, which was to be kind. "Loretta Chalfont," he said, "née Faraday. She was 19 years old in the winter of 1914, and she was sent to her father's cousin in Omaha, as girls were, and you were born there in the June of 1915 at a private hospital on Farnham Street that no longer exists. She signed a surrender. It is on file with the society. There is nothing irregular about any of it, Miss Ostrander, and there are 10,000 like it in this state." He let that sit a second. "And now, before you say anything further, I am instructed to tell you something, and I would ask you to hear it in the spirit in which it is offered." "Go on." "She has always intended to see you provided for." He opened a drawer. There was a sum set by, $200,
which I think you will find is a good deal of money in 1935, and I am authorized to add to it the price of a ticket and 1 month's board in Lincoln, where there is a business college that takes young women and where a person with your evident wits would do very well indeed. $200, Miss Ostrander. I have seen a family of 5 live a year on less. And here is where I must be honest about myself, because I have not spared anybody else in this story. For about the space of 4 heartbeats, I was glad. Not for the money, I want to be exact. It was the words provided for and always intended, and something in me, some 10-year-old girl who had made up stories at the fair about a lady from the society, reached up out of the floor of me and grabbed those words with both hands. She meant to. All along, in some room, in some way I could not see, she meant to. My eyes stung, and I had to look at the fan on the filing cabinet. Then Mr. Pruitt slid a paper across the desk, turned around to face me, with a pen laid across it. I read it. He had it ready. It had been typed some while ago because the ribbon on it was fresher at the bottom than the top, the way it goes when a page sits in a machine. And there was a place for my name and a place for 2 witnesses. It said that, in consideration of the sum named, I released all claim of any nature whatsoever, and made no assertion of relationship to any person, and undertook to remove myself from Otoe County within 10 days, and not to return, and not to communicate by any means with the party of the first part, or any member of her household. 4 heartbeats. That is what it cost me. The stinging in my eyes dried up like water on a stove lid. When was this typed, Mr. Pruitt? I beg your pardon? It's not fresh. You didn't run this off while I was coming up your stairs. I put my finger on it. This has been in a drawer waiting for me. How long? He did not answer. How long, sir? It was drawn in 1933, Wendell Pruitt said, when you turned 18, as a contingency. A contingency? I laughed. It came out of me like a hiccup, and it was an awful sound in that quiet room, and I have never made it again. I've been a contingency in a drawer for 2 years, Miss Ostrander. He leaned forward, and his voice changed. And this was the last kindness he had, and he spent it on me all at once. I am going to say a thing to you that is not in my interest to say, and I would be obliged if you never repeat that I said it. In 14 years, that woman has never once asked me a question about you. Not whether you were living, not whether you had the measles, not one. She has come into this office 4 times a year and signed a draft and asked me how the winter wheat looked. Whatever it is you are going up Sumner Street to get, and I know you are, I can see it on you. It is not there. It has never been there. Take the $200, child. I picked up my bundle off his desk, and I tied the lace back around it. You asked me for 3 things, and I have given you 2, he said. You asked why Ashgrove. I did. I have no answer for you. And there it was, the one place in that whole conversation where the smooth man went past his own edge. And the reason I knew he was telling the truth is that he looked genuinely put out about it. I was instructed to find a plain farm family in the neighboring county, within 25 miles, of no social pretension, in need of money. I found the Suddeths. Why within 25 miles, Miss Ostrander, I do not know. It is the single item in this arrangement that I have never been able to account for, and I have turned it over more than once, and I would advise you to leave it alone. Sumner Street is 3 blocks off the square, and it goes up a little rise, and I walked it because I did not want the truck out in front of that house, and I did not know yet why. And I have since understood it was because some part of me was still trying not to embarrass her. She was on the porch. That is the thing I did not expect and had not steeled myself for. She was on that wrap-around porch in a wicker chair with a pan in her lap, snapping beans out of a bushel basket the way any woman in Nebraska did at that hour of that month. And it made her ordinary for a second. And that was very nearly worse than everything else. She saw me at the gate. Her hands stopped. I came up the walk and I stood at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at her, and she looked down at me. And neither of us said one word for what must have been a full half-minute. The piano had stopped. Somewhere in the house, a screen door slapped, and a girl's voice called something about the ice card. "Not on the front," Loretta Chalfant said quietly. "Go around to the kitchen door." I had 100 sentences ready. That is not a figure of speech. I had spent the walk up Sumner Street laying them out like tools on a bench. Every one of them went out of my head, and what came out of my mouth was, "No." She set the pan of beans down on the floorboards. She stood, and she was tall, taller than me, and she crossed to the head of the steps and looked out at the street both ways before she looked at me again. And I saw her decide that a girl on the front walk was less remarkable than a girl being walked around the side of the house. "Say what you came to say." June of 1915, Farnham Street in Omaha. "Who told you that?" "Your lawyer 10 minutes ago. And he told me because I had the drafts in my hand." I did not raise my voice. I had not raised my voice in that entire day, and I did not for the rest of it. "I've come 22 miles to ask you one question, and it's not for money, and it's not to be let in your house. Did you know where I was? That is not 14 years. Did you know where I was? Yes." It is a strange thing. I had known the answer since Wednesday morning on a rag rug in Mabel Sudduth's bedroom. Hearing it out loud in a woman's voice in daylight, with a bushel of beans on the porch floor, went through me like a shovel going into ground. "Then I'll ask the second one," I said. "Why keep me close? You could have had me placed in Idaho. There were trains going every direction out of Omaha. You paid to have me put 22 miles up the road, and then you paid for 14 years to keep me from ever walking down it. What was the good of that?" And Loretta Chalfant said, "I had nothing to do with where you were placed." She said it too fast. She said it a half second before the end of my question, the way a person answers a thing she has rehearsed, and both of us heard it. And something moved behind that long face that I recognized because I had grown up watching Mabel Sudduth's face do it. The sum coming out wrong. "Now you listen to me." She came down one step. "I was 19. My father put me on a train and told the town I was nursing his sister. There was no choice offered to me, not one. And if you have come here to stand in my yard at 20 years of age and tell me what I ought to have done in 1915, you may save your breath. Because I have said it all to myself in the night, more times than you have drawn breath in your life. I haven't said one word about what you ought to have done in 1915. Then what do you want? I want to know about 1921. And 1924, and 1929, and every fair I stood at that rail, and you stood by the ice cream and looked at me, and went off." My voice did shake then, once, and I got it back. 1915, you were a girl, and somebody did it to you. Every quarter day since, you were a grown woman with a checkbook, and you did it yourself. That was when she cried. I have gone back and forth all my life on whether it was real,
And I have settled on this. It was real. And it did not mean what crying usually means. Some people cry the way other people go for a weapon. She put her hand up over her mouth, and her eyes went red and wet inside of 2 seconds. And she said through it, "You cannot come here. You cannot come to this house. Do you understand what you are doing? He does not know. My husband does not know. My daughter does not know. My daughter is 14 years old." "Which daughter?" Loretta Chalfant took her hand down from her mouth. Her eyes were still wet, and everything behind them had gone dry as a road. "That," she said, "was a mistake. I will tell you now exactly how this will go, and then you will get off my walk. You have no paper with your name and mine on it. What you have is a bundle of drafts for board money, which any decent woman in this county might pay for a poor child, and if you carry that story into Larkin, I will not deny one word of it. I will be very sorry for you. I will say the Chalfants have quietly helped an orphan girl for 14 years, and that the girl has got a notion in her head, and that we do not hold it against her, and that we will go on helping her if she will let us. And they will believe me, Miss Ostrander. They will believe me because I sit in the third pew and my husband employs 40 men, and because you are a hired girl in a made-over dress with dirt under your nails. That is not cruelty. That is the town. Go home." I stood at the bottom of those steps and I looked up at her a while longer. "You've never once said my name," I said. "Not to Mr. Pruitt in 14 years and not to me in 10 minutes. Then I went back down Sumner Street, and at the corner of Sumner and 3rd, in the window of the Larkin Ledger office, printed on a card in a hand that had been done with a straight edge, was the notice of the dedication of the new memorial window at the Larkin Methodist Episcopal Church. The gift of Mr. and Mrs. Rand Chalfant, in memory of the children of this county, the 2nd Sunday in October, all welcome, dinner on the grounds. The 2nd Sunday in October. I stood in front of that glass and did the arithmetic. I had 31 days. I did not go home that night and put my head in my hands. I went home and I got out the egg book. $11.40 in the stocking. The bus from Ashgrove to Nebraska City was 35 cents, and the train from Nebraska City up to Omaha was $1.90 each way, and a room at the Y was 75 cents. And I sat at the kitchen table with a stub of pencil and worked it 4 different ways while Mabel washed dishes behind me and said nothing at all. That was how it was in that house for the next 3 weeks. Nobody hollered. Nobody put me out. We went on milking and canning and pulling corn, 3 women in a kitchen being scrupulously polite. And it was the loneliest stretch of my whole life. And I have wondered since whether Mabel found it so too. On the 2nd night, Everett came and stood in the door of the back room with his hat in his hand, like a man calling on somebody. "Show me one of them papers again," he said. I gave him the September draft, the one Mabel had brought home from Larkin in her pocketbook the day before it all came apart, because that one she had handed over without being asked, and I have always counted it as the only apology I ever got from her. He took it out under the porch lamp and held it up and turned it, and he was a long time about it, and when he came back in, his face had changed. "That's not her money," he said. "Sir, it's the company's paper now." He put his blunt finger on the corner. "See there? Chalfant Lumber and Grain Company. Printed. I've took 100 of these for hogs and hauling. That's drawed on the business account, not a household account. And there's a stamp on the back where it's been through their bookkeeper. 14 years of it." He looked up at me. A man that runs an elevator and a yard don't sign every check himself.
He signs the big ones, and his wife or his clerk signs the little ones, and it goes in a column at the end of the month. But he's got books, girl. Somewhere in that office, there's 14 years of a column with $18 in it 4 times a year. And a man like Rand Chalfant will know his own books like the back of his hand, and he will know he never put a nickel of it there. I sat down on the edge of my bed.
You mean to say he don't know? I mean to say I'd bet this farm on it, Everett said, and I ain't got much left to bet.
I went to Omaha on the 21st of September, and I have never forgotten a minute of that day. I had been to Nebraska City twice and to Lincoln never, and here I was walking up Farnham Street with the buildings going up on both sides and the streetcars and a man selling apples on a corner and the noise of it coming at me from every direction. Somewhere in that town, I had been born in a June, and somewhere in it, I had eaten my meals and learned to talk, and I did not know one single stone of it. The society kept its office on the second floor of a building on Harney Street. I had written ahead and I had signed it, Miss Nell Ostrander, placed out of your care at Ashgrove, Oto County, on the 9th of March, 1921, tag number 41. And I had asked for the courtesy of an interview about my own record. And the woman who came out of the inner room to meet me was 78 years old, walked with a cane, and had been retired 11 years, and had come in on the streetcar that morning on purpose. "You would be 41, Ottilie Rask said. "Ma'am, do you mean to tell me you remember?" "I do not remember 4,000 children," she said. "I remember you." She sat down and hooked the cane over the arm of the chair. "Because in 41 years of this work, yours was the only placement I ever made where I was handed the name of the family before I was handed the train." She had the register on the table. It was the same book. I knew it the second I saw it, a long green ledger with a cloth spine, and I had last seen it under the arm of a woman with her finger on a line, while a man in a clean shirt asked whether that was the one, and I put my hand flat on the cover of it before I could stop myself. She let me. She waited until I took my hand back.
"Now," she said, "I am going to tell you first, and then I am going to show you, because the showing goes better if you are not learning it at the same time. You were not surrendered as an infant, Miss Ostrander." The fan on the windowsill turned. Down in the street, somebody's brakes went. "You were boarded. You were placed at nurse in this city with a woman named Josepha Went on South 10th Street at the age of 11 days, and the board was paid regular, and you remained with her until you were 5 years and 8 months old. Mrs. Went was a decent woman, and she had 4 of them at a time, and she kept them clean, and she is dead now. 12 years. Miss Rask turned the ledger around so it faced me and put one finger on a line. "You came into the care of this society on the 6th of February, 1921, not 1915. You were surrendered at 5 years and 8 months, and you went out on the March placing train, and that is what your record says. And I have never known how to say it gently, and I am too old now to try." I read the line. The clerk's hand was beautiful. Ostrander Nell, age 5 years 8 months, received the 6th of February, 1921. Surrendered by mother, Loretta Faraday Chalfant, of Larkin, Oto County. And then a second column, and in it, placed the 9th of March, 1921, Everett Suddeth, Route 2, Ashgrove, Oto County. Tag 41. 5 years, I said. 5 years and 8 months. Then my mouth was dry as ashes, and I had to start over. Then somebody had me. For 5 years, somebody had me, and I don't remember one thing about it. Not one thing. Ma'am, I've got no more of it than... And then I did have something of it. It came up out of nowhere at all, the way those things do, sitting in an office chair on Harney Street at 20 years of age. A room with a green shade pulled down against afternoon sun. A woman's coat, blue, and the cold of the buttons on it against my cheek, and a smell. Lavender water. Somebody who smelled of lavender water, who came sometimes and not often, and a thing I said or was taught to say, and I could feel the shape of the word in my mouth without any sound to it at all. I put both hands over my face and I sat in that woman's office, and I made a sound I am not going to describe. Miss Rask did not touch me and did not say anything soothing. She sat with her hands folded on her cane and let me get through it. And when I was done, she gave me her own handkerchief, which was ironed. "She came to see you," I said, "at the Went woman's. There are receipts in the file signed by Mrs. Went for board paid, and there are 4 notations of visits, and I would not swear the notations are complete." Miss Rask turned a page. "Now, there is more, and it is worse, and you will want it." "Show me." She laid out 3 papers on that table. The first was the surrender dated the 6th of February, 1921, signed Loretta F. Chalfant in a small, taut, slanted hand I could have picked out of 100. The second was a letter on linen paper, dated the same week, in the same hand, addressed to the superintendent of the society, and it requested, I read it 4 times to be sure I had it, that the child be placed with a plain farming family in Otoe County or one adjoining, within 25 miles of the town of Larkin, and that the family be given to understand that no inquiry would be welcome, and that the writer would be pleased to defray the cost of clothing. Within 25 miles of the town of Larkin, in her hand. I had nothing to do with where you were placed. And the third paper was a copy of a letter written on the 11th of February, 1921, by Miss Ottilie Rask, agent, to that same superintendent, in which she stated that she had been directed to place child number 41 with a family selected in advance by the surrendering party through an attorney, that she regarded this as irregular and contrary to the settled practice of the society, that in her judgment the arrangement served the convenience of the mother and not the welfare of the child, and that she wished her objection entered on the file. Her objection had been entered on the file. Underneath it, in another hand, somebody had written, "Noted. Proceed as directed." 14 years and 7 months, Miss Rask said. "I have had that on my conscience. I did as I was told, and I put a 5-year-old girl on a stage in a lodge hall in front of a man who had been told which number to take. Do not make a saint of me, Miss Ostrander. I wrote a letter, and then I did it anyhow. That is what most people's courage amounts to, and I have had a long time to think about mine." I asked her for one more thing before I left, and it was the thing that finished the whole arithmetic. I asked her whether the file said why, whether there was any reason set down in February of 1921 that a woman who had boarded a child for 5 years and 8 months and paid every month and come to see her would suddenly hand her over to the state. Miss Rask looked at me a while. Then she said, "The file does not, but the ledger at Larkin will. Child, I have done this work my whole life. When a woman keeps one for 5 years and then gives it up inside of a month, there is a new one in the house." The Larkin ledger kept its bound volumes in the back room, and the boy at the counter let me at them for a dime, and I found it in the issue of the 28th of January, 1921. 3 lines in the column between a hay auction and a notice about the school levy. Born to Mr. and Mrs. Rand Chalfant of this city, a daughter, Dovey Amelia,
The 22nd instant. Mother and child are doing well. The 22nd of January. And on the 6th of February, 15 days later, my mother came into an office in Omaha and signed me away, and wrote a letter asking that I be put somewhere she could keep her eye on. Not to see me.
I want to say this the way I finally understood it. Sitting in the back room of a newspaper office with a bound volume open on my knees and the dust standing in the light. She did not keep me within 25 miles so she could look at me at the fair. She kept me within 25 miles so she would always know exactly which door I might come through and when. A woman does not watch a thing she loves that way. She watches a thing she is afraid of. I had 18 days. Miss Rask made out a transcript of every one of those documents in her own hand, and we walked to a notary on Douglas Street, and she swore to them, and it cost me $1.50, and she would not take the $1.50. Then she said a thing I did not expect at all.
When is it to be?
Ma'am, you did not come to Omaha and spend your egg money to have a private cry, Miss Ostrander. You came for paper. Paper is for showing to people. When is it to be and where?
The second Sunday in October, I said, at the Methodist Church in Larkin. They're giving a window. Ottilie Rask laughed. It was a short, dry laugh, and there was not much humor in it. A window, in memory of the children of this county. You've seen it. It was in the church paper. She put both hands on her cane and got herself up. There is a train out of Omaha Saturday afternoon that will put me in Nebraska City at 6:10. I would take it as a kindness if somebody would meet me. The 3 weeks after that went by like a held breath. I pulled corn. I canned tomatoes until my hands were raw with the acid and the skin split at the knuckles. I did not go into Larkin.
I wrote out on a piece of tablet paper exactly what I was going to say, and then I burned it, because I read it over and it sounded like a speech, and a speech is a thing people can wait out. Birdie came out to the farm twice on her afternoon off on a bicycle, 22 miles each way, and she brought me the town. Mr. Pruitt had been to the Chalfont house on the evening of the 11th and had stayed 2 hours. There had been 3 long-distance calls booked to a Lincoln number in the last fortnight, and Birdie did not tell me one word that was said on them, and I did not ask. And I want that understood, because Birdie Lorimer never in her life listened in, and I will not have it said that she did. She told me the numbers. The numbers were enough. Opal did not ask to come. She just started doing things. She took over the milking of 3 of the 6 without a word said, so I could get the canning done in daylight. She let out the seam of my good dress and turned the cuffs and pressed it and hung it on the back of my door on the Friday, and she had put a bit of white lawn collar on it that had come off something of hers. We still were not right, she and I. We would not be right for another 2 years. But that collar was on there. And Everett said, on the Thursday, standing in the machine shed with his back to me, "I'll drive you. You don't have to be in that church." "I do have to be in that church," he said. "I carried the paper up that aisle in 1921. There ain't a soul else in this world can say what I can say about how you come to be at my table. And if I let you stand up in front of that town by yourself with a bundle of drafts and no living voice behind you, then what she said about you will be what sticks. And I'll have done it to you twice." He turned around then. "I ain't going to ask you to call me anything now, but I'll drive you, and I'll stand up, and I'll say what I done." The night before, I did not go to bed at all. I sat up in the kitchen with the lamp turned low and the papers squared on the oilcloth in front of me. The 39 drafts on the bootlace, the letter out of the tobacco sack, and Miss Rask's transcripts with the notary's seal pressed into the corner
where you could feel it with your thumb. The house ticked and settled. Along about 2, the wind came up, and I heard the windmill catch and go. And at 3, I made coffee and drank it standing at the window looking at nothing, at the dark where the yard was. I thought about the $200 in Wendell Pruitt's drawer. I would like to tell you I never once thought about it, and that is not true. I thought about it for an hour, and about a room in Lincoln with a door that locked, and a business college, and a life where nobody in it had ever heard of any of this. That was a real road, and it was right there, and I could have taken it. And then I thought about a girl of 14 in a blue dress with a white collar, standing in a fruit exhibit in August, being turned away by the elbow. Nobody had ever told her either. Whatever else came of Sunday, one thing would be true at the end of it that had never been true. It would be said out loud in a room with people in it, and after that, it could not be unsaid. And nobody would ever again be able to arrange me quietly. At 5, I went out and milked. At 7:30, I put on the dress with Opal's collar on it. And when I came down, Mabel Suddeth was standing at the bottom of the stairs in her good coat with her hat pinned on. "I'm going," she said, before I could say anything at all. "I took the money. It was 14 years, and it was my hand that took it, every one of them. If it's to be said in front of the whole county, then I'll be sitting in it and not out here hiding behind a stove." I did not thank her. I could not that morning. But I have thought since that of all of us in that truck, she was the only one who had nothing to gain by being there. And she came anyway. The Larkin Methodist Episcopal Church was full that morning, and there were folding chairs down both side aisles from the undertakers, and the doors were propped because it was 78 degrees in October, and everybody had a fan going from Hoyt's funeral home with a picture of a river on it. We came in at 5 minutes to 11, the 5 of us, and there was no place left together. So Everett and Mabel took 2 chairs against the left wall, and Opal stood at the back by the coat hooks, and Miss Ottilie Rask sat in the last pew on the aisle with the green ledger flat on her knees under her handbag, and I took a chair in the 3rd row from the back on the right, which was the only single seat left in that building, and the best one I could have picked if I had chosen it. The window was in the east wall behind the pulpit, and the morning was full on it. It was a shepherd on a hillside with 3 lambs at his feet, and the light coming through him in about 9 colors. And it was beautiful. I will not pretend otherwise. And along the bottom, in a band of amber glass with black lettering, it said, "Suffer the little children to come unto me." And under that, smaller, "In memory of the children of this county, given by Rand and Loretta Chalfant, 1935. They sat in the 3rd pew from the front on the pulpit side. Rand Chalfant was a broad, short man of about 50, with a red neck over his collar and hands like a man who had loaded lumber before he owned any. And Dovey was beside him in something pale, with her hair pinned up for the occasion, 14 years old and trying to sit like a woman. And Loretta Chalfant was on the aisle in gray, with her gloves in her lap. Reverend Amos Teasdale preached 20 minutes on the 18th of Matthew, and there was a solo, and then he said that before the dedication itself, Mrs. Chalfant had a few words she wished to say, and would we all give her our attention. She went up. She had 3 cards in her gloved hand, and she did not need them. She said that she and Mr. Chalfant had wanted the window to be about children because a county is only ever as good as what it does about its children. She said that times had been very hard for 6 years, and that there was not a family in that room that had not gone without, and that the ones who suffer it worst never get a vote and never get asked. She said,
And this is word for word because I have not forgotten a syllable of it, and I never will. She said, "There are children in this county tonight who will go to sleep in a house that is not their own, among people who owe them nothing. When you look at this window, I would ask you to think about them and to be a friend to one of them if the Lord puts it in your way." There was a sound through that church, the little soft sound a crowd makes when it is moved, 100 people breathing out at once. Somebody said amen. Mrs. Dietrich, 2 rows ahead of me, put her fan down in her lap and wiped under her eye with her thumb. And I stood up. I have been asked 100 times since how I had the nerve. I did not have any nerve. What I had was 3 weeks of pulling corn and 1 night at a kitchen table and a thing in my chest that had gone cold and steady in a milk house in the dark. And when I got to my feet, my knees were water and my ears were roaring, and I could not feel my own hands. I put one of them on the back of the pew in front of me. The wood was cool. I hung on to it. "Ma'am," I said, "I'm one of them." I want to tell you what a church sounds like when 180 people stop moving at the same instant. It is not silence. You can hear the fans that people have not yet thought to stop waving, and a horse out at the hitch rail, and somebody's child asking a question in a whisper. Heads came around slow, the way they do when nobody wants to be the first to be caught looking. Reverend Teasdale said, "Young woman, my name is Nell Ostrander. I was placed out of the Nebraska Children's Home at Ashgrove on the 9th of March, 1921, off the train, out of the Oddfellows Hall, with a cardboard tag pinned through the shoulder of my coat with the number 41 on it. I have lived 22 miles from this church every day since, and I have never been in this town but on Thursdays with Angs." Loretta Chalfant stood at that pulpit, and she did not move a muscle of her face. I will give her this, and it is the only thing I will give her. She was the steadiest person in that building. "This is the Sudduth girl," she said to the room in a voice full of gentle regret. "Everett, I'm sorry. Reverend, there's no harm in her. We have helped this child since she was 6 years old, and I'm afraid she has got a notion into her head, and it is my own fault for never having let it be known." She turned back to the congregation and spread her hands a little. "I did not want it talked about. That is all. Perhaps I should have." And I felt that room swing. I felt it go, the whole 200 of them, like a gate on a slope. Mrs. Dietrich's face changed to pity, and pity was the end of me, because you cannot argue against pity. And I was a hired girl in a made-over dress with a white collar off somebody else's blouse, standing up in the 3rd pew from the back, accusing the woman who had just given them a window. Everett Sudduth got up off his folding chair against the wall. "Reverend," he said, "I'd like to say how she come to my table." Nobody said he could. Nobody said he couldn't. He turned his hat around in his hands, but he was not a speaking man, and it came out of him in that flat, plain way, and there was not a sound in the church. March of 1921. I went into the lodge hall at Ashgrove to take in a child, same as 4 other men in that county done that year. Only I never went in to pick one. I went in with a paper in my shirt pocket that Wendell Pruitt of this town wrote out for me in his office over the Oddfellows. And on that paper was one thing, and it was a number. And the number was 41. I was to take 41 and no other, and I was to ask nothing, and I was to be paid quarterly for her board. And I took $25 in April of 1921, and $18 every quarter day for 14 years after.
and my wife carried it home from Mr. Pruitt's office in her pocketbook. And the last one is in that girl's hand right now with the 9th of September on it." He stopped and swallowed and went on. "I'm 58 years old, and I was raised in this county, and I have never took a dishonest dollar but them. That's what I got to say. I have never heard 200 people so quiet." Wendell Pruitt, 4 rows from the front, put his hand up over his mouth and left it there. Loretta said, "Everett has had a hard," and at the back of the church, Miss Ottilie Rask stood up in the last pew with the green ledger held against her chest, 78 years old, and her voice went up that whole aisle like a nail going into a board. Ottilie Rask, placing agent of the State Society, 41 years, retired. I have the register here, and I will show it to any man in this room. Nell Ostrander, born the 2nd of June, 1915, at Omaha, boarded at nurse with Mrs. Josepha Went, South 10th Street, from the age of 11 days until she was 5 years and 8 months old. Board paid regular by one hand every month of it. Received into the care of the Society on the 6th of February, 1921. Surrendered by her mother. She let it hang exactly long enough. Loretta Faraday Chalfant of Larkin in this county, whose signature is in this book, and I will hold it up. She held it up. "And there is a letter in that file in the same hand," Miss Rask said, "dated that same week, requiring that the child be placed with plain farming people within 25 miles of the town of Larkin, and that the family be given to understand that no inquiry would be welcome. I objected to that placement in writing at the time. My objection is on the file. I have carried it 14 years, and I am done carrying it." Dovey Chalfant turned around in the 3rd pew and looked down the length of that church at me. That is the picture I have kept out of the whole morning. Not the window and not her mother's face. A girl of 14 with her hair pinned up, turned all the way around backward in a pew in front of the whole town, working it out. February of 1921, and her own birthday the 22nd of January. Working it out right there while everybody watched her do it. Rand Chalfant did not look at his wife. He looked at Wendell Pruitt. "Wendell," he said, "what a count." Pruitt took his hand down from his mouth. He was gray as the wall. He was a lawyer of 40 years standing in a town of 1,100 people, and every client he had was sitting in that room, and I watched the man do the only arithmetic that was left to him. "The company account, Rand," he said. "It has been the company account since April of 1921. That was the sound of it going. Rand Chalfant sat there another second or two, and then he put his hands on his knees and got up and walked out of the church by the side door, and he did not slam it. And the quiet way that door shut was the loudest thing that happened all morning. Loretta came down out of that pulpit. She came down the 2 steps and up the center aisle toward me, and she got about halfway before she stopped, because there was nowhere for her to be going, and she stood in the middle of the aisle of her own church with 200 people looking at her, and she said to me, low, the way you'd say it across a kitchen, "What is it that you want?" And I found I did not have to reach for it at all. $18 a quarter, ma'am. My voice carried. I did not make it carry. That building did it for me. That was the figure. $6 a month from a woman with a lumber yard for a child she boarded 5 years and then couldn't have in the county without knowing which road she was on. The window cost more. Nobody moved. "I don't want your money, and I won't take it. And if you send Mr. Pruitt after me with a paper, I'll not sign it. I came 22 miles to have it said out loud in a room with people in it, because a thing that is only in a drawer can be paid off. and a thing that is said in front of the county can't. It's said now. I picked up my hat off the seat. You told them to be a friend to one of us if the Lord put it in their way. He put one in yours in February of 1921, and you wrote a letter about how far off to set her. That's all I have to say to you, and it's the last thing I ever will. Then I walked out, and Opal came with me from the coat hooks and got hold of my arm, and Everett and Mabel came behind us, and Miss Rask came last with her cane. And outside, the sun was so bright after that colored glass that I could not see the truck. There was no dinner on the grounds. Here is what came of it, and I will tell it plainly and without any relish, because I found out that year that being right does not taste anything like people say it does. Rand Chalfant had his books gone over by an accountant from Nebraska City. 14 years and 4 months, $237 a year at the finish, counting the early ones, put through under sundry expense. A column his wife had signed because she had always signed the small ones. He did not divorce her. People did not much. And there was Dovey. He put her on the train to her cousin's in Lincoln the week before Thanksgiving, and she has lived there since. And he stayed in Larkin and ran the elevator and sat every Sunday in the third pew by himself, with his daughter beside him. And I am told he never once spoke of it in that town again. Wendell Pruitt kept his office open until March. He was not disbarred. Nothing he did was against the law, and I want people to understand that, because the worst of what was done to me was every bit of it legal. He simply found that men who had used him for 30 years began to take their business to Nebraska City, quietly, one at a time, and by spring he had closed the 2 rooms over the Oddfellows and gone to live with his brother in Falls City. He wrote me one letter. I did not answer it. The window is still there. They took the little brass card off the sill, the one with the names on it, sometime that winter, and nobody ever said who did it. In memory of the children of this county is still in the amber glass along the bottom, because you cannot take a thing like that out without taking the whole window out. Ashgrove was harder on Mabel Suddeth than Larkin was on anybody. A woman who took money to keep a girl is a thing a farm county understands too well and forgives too slow. Nobody said a word to her face. Nobody sat by her at the aid either, for about 2 years. She never complained of it in my hearing, not once. And she never asked me for anything. And when I came out on Sundays that first winter, she would put a plate in front of me and say, "You're thin." And that was as far as either of us could get. I started on the switchboard the last Monday in October at $8 a week, and I took the room over Ivor's Hardware for $2.25, with a window that looked down on the street and a door that locked with a key that was mine. It is June of 1936 now, and I am 21 years old, and I want to tell you about my nights. The Larkin Exchange runs 2 girls in the daytime and 1 after 9, and the 1 after 9 is me, because I asked for it. The board is a wall of little brass eyes in the dark, and when a farm 8 miles out takes its receiver off the hook, one of them opens and a light comes up, and I put the cord in and say, "Number, please." I know every line in 3 townships. I know that the Prather's ring is 2 long and a short, and that old Mr. Dietrich calls his sister in Talmadge every Tuesday at 9, because that is when the rate drops. And I know which house it is when a woman's voice says, "Operator, quick," and does not finish the sentence, because I have run to get Doc Ivers out of bed 11 times since Christmas, and we have not lost one yet. Opal comes in Saturdays on the bus, and we go to the picture show. It took the 2 of us the better part of 2 years, and I am not going to say it is all mended, because I do not think a thing like that mends the way a bone does. It grows over crooked and it aches when the weather turns and you go on using it. But she is my sister. I have quit trying to find a better word. Everett drives in the first Thursday of the month with eggs for Mrs. Ivers and comes up my stairs and sits in my one chair with his hat on his knee and tells me the prices. And before he goes, he always says the same thing, which is, "Anything you need, you say." He has never once asked me to call him anything. Clay came home from the Sandhills in April with shoulders on him like a door and stood in my room and looked around it and said, "Well, look at you." And I have not stopped being pleased about that yet. Dovey Chalfant wrote to me first, in February, on her own paper, a careful letter that had been written out 3 times before it was sent. You could tell.
She came up my stairs at Easter and sat on my bed with her hands in her lap and asked me questions for 2 hours. And one of them was what the woman at South 10th Street had been like. And I had to tell her that I did not know, that I had 11 days and 5 years and 8 months in that city, and all I have of it is a green window shade and the smell of lavender water. She is 15. She is nothing like her mother, and she is a good deal like me, and neither of us has decided yet what to do about that. She comes when she can. Her mother has never written. I did not expect it, and I do not want it, and there is only one night I have to tell you about. It was in March about 10:15, and the light came up on the long-distance trunk from Lincoln, and the operator on the other end asked me for the Chalfant residence in Larkin, and there was a voice behind hers giving the number. I knew it in one word. 22 miles I had lived from that voice, and I heard it once on a porch with a pan of beans, and I knew it in one word. I sat there with the cord in my hand for the space of about 2 breaths. Then I put it in the jack, and I rang the Chalfant house, 3 shorts, and Dovey answered, and I said, "Long distance for you, go ahead please," and I pulled my key back, and I did not listen, and I got up and stood at the window over the street until the light went dark on the board. She has to come through me now. Every word she says to that town from Lincoln, Nebraska, comes through my hands at 10:15 at night, and I put every one of them through correctly in a pleasant voice, because that is the work, and I am good at it. The tag hangs on a nail over the cord shelf where I can see it all night. It is cardboard the color of weak tea, with a rusted pen through the corner and my name on it in a clerk's hand, and the number 41 down in the bottom corner in different ink. Somebody else wrote that number on me and penned it through my coat when I was 6 years old and put me up on a stage to be looked at. I am the one who hung it up. And when a light comes up at 2 in the morning and a voice a long way off in the dark says, "Operator, can you get me through?" I can. I always could. I told a man in a lodge hall once that I could carry 2. Well, friends, that is where the story leaves us. And I have a question for you. Everett Sudduth stood up in that church and told the whole county what he had done, 14 years too late. And I have never in my life been able to decide whether that made him a good man who did a wrong thing or a weak one who finally got tired of carrying it. What do you think? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this one. There should be a playlist coming up on your screen with other stories from this channel, and I would love it if you stayed a while longer.